well enough to hold a normal conversation without the affectations and bizarre ideas associated with schizophrenia. He was the worse for wear, from a few beers occasionally, but I never saw him incoherent, and I lived in the same small dormitory as him for a few months. Terry had been non-violent so far on Guy Ward. Though he was still occasionally angry, it was not directed at anyone, just at his situation and the hospital, which he still described as hell. He was no bully either. He never used his superior boxing skills to take advantage of the other patients. He might let you know if he was irritated, but that was about it. He really didn't like being on a long-stay ward. Terry's hopes must have been raised when his Aunt Pat and Uncle Tony invited him to dinner. They turned up to take Terry to their home, and Jack had them wait in the day room, which was almost empty for the few old men, except for the few old men patients who were permanently installed in front of the television. However, on this particular evening the television was turned off by Jack, who was a little in awe of Aunt Pat, because she's also David Bowie's aunt. Jack pointed them out to me from the other side of the day room. They were well dressed and conventional. Aunt Pat wore a dress. Uncle Tony wore a brown suit. Both would not have looked out of place had it been the 60s or 50s. They looked middle class, not poor or ostentatiously rich. They looked anonymous but dignified and reserved, and nervous of the hospital surroundings. The fact that Terry has held his temper on the ward has not gone unnoticed by Jack. From the other side of the day room, in an alcove by a side door where we can slip in and out of their view, we stole the odd glimpse. Guy Ward, day room. Jack: Terry's been a great disappointment to me. I was hoping he'd sort up those skivers up there. Michael and Paul, and Clifford doesn't do anything either. I don't know what's got into Terry. He's supposed to frighten some sense into that lot. Paul's looking towards Terry's relatives. Maybe this lot will be able to help me get rid of him. Narrator: What do you mean? Well, they could take him off my hands. He's no use to me. You mean Terry could go and live with them? Jack: We don't know yet. They might have him. It depends on how this visit goes. Narrative: Terry went off to dinner with them, and I was asleep before he returned to the dormitory. Terry was asleep when I woke up. Terry often lay in of a morning. The nurse never woke him for fear of invoking his temper. I walked downstairs and was about to leave the ward and walk towards the corridor when Jack approached me. Guy Ward, day room. Jack, partly vindicated by the fact that Terry has at last committed a violent act. That Terry is in trouble now. He's blown it. He hit his uncle last night. Narrative: I went off to wire ceiling roses, which I am told is a 17-point assembly and one of the most, if not most, difficult jobs in the industrial therapy unit. For some reason I had to go back to the ward. Guy Ward dormitory. Narrative: Terry had just woken up and wanted a cigarette. He told me about his visit. Terry: He asked me if I wanted a drink. I thought he meant a proper drink, a few beers or something. Then he poured me a sherry in one of those little glasses. I was insulted. Punched him. I'm worried they might send me back to Ruskin. Narrator: They can't really do anything because the incident did not happen on the premises. As long as your uncle does not press charges, you'll be all right. Narrative: His uncle did not press charges, but the reputation Terry had tried so hard to repair was again in tatters. He was unwittingly distanced himself from his mother and his stepbrother. He was not sent to Ruskin, but at the Kangaroo Court meeting that inevitably follows a violent incident, attended by Terry, Dr. Jansen, and Jack the nurse, Terry had to agree to take a part-time job in the stores behind the hospital shop, fetching and carrying for Pat. Guy Ward, day room. Jack to narrator: He's got away with it. Narrative: But really, Terry is condemned to spend the rest of his life at Canehill. Jack was not happy and thought that Terry should have been sent back to Ruskin. Somewhat hypocritically, for someone who was looking forward to Terry starting trouble when he was first transferred to the ward, Jack complained that he did not want violence on the ward. A ward meeting was called. Guy Ward, day room. Jack: Dr. Patel is going to do something about the lazy buggers lying on their beds all day, as well as that Terry. I think you should turn up as well to help motivate the others. Narrative. Dr. Patel had us, Terry, Michael, Paul and Clifford, who had a side room and also did not attend therapy, and myself sit around in a circle. I had been asked to attend as I was the only patient working who could hold a conversation, and I had had experience of group therapy. I was glad to be out of the industrial therapy hut for the morning. Guy wall day room, chairs around a coffee table, windows on the back wall. Dr. Patel. We all need to work. Clifford, why don't you go to industrial therapy? Clifford. It's not worth it for that money. The pay's abysmal. Dr. Patel. I have plenty of physically and mentally disabled patients happy to work for this rate of pay. Life is not the two Ronnies. Clifford. I know life is not like the two Ronnies, and I know what this meeting is about. I'm off. Michael had also cottoned on to the real purpose of the meeting and made his way to the washroom, which was off the day room, where the meeting took place. The door had been left open to allow the floor to dry after it had been washed. Michael found a puddle on the floor and was soon tearing up bits of paper and floating them on the water. Paul. Look what Michael's doing. Dr. Patel. Michael has dementia precox and he cannot help it. Would you and Terry at least think about working? Paul and Terry, muttering reluctantly. All right. Guy Ward dormitory. It is late at night, and Michael is creeping around the dormitory, rifling the patient's clothes and stealing any money he finds. Guy Ward dormitory. The following morning. Paul. That Michael was at it again last night, stealing the old boy's money. It's disgusting. He buys those tablets, then he's ranting and raving all day. The staff won't do anything about it. I've told them. There's nothing they can do because they said there's nothing they can do because he's a kleptomaniac. And it's an illness, so it's up to the doctors to do something, and they couldn't care less. Terry, in a way I admire him. Paul, you're joking. Terry, it's survival. Terry kept up his routine of begging, drinking, and then returning to the ward to sleep off the effects of drinking on medication. I remember one morning Terry woke up late in the dormitory. Guy Ward dormitory. Terry, you'll never believe this. Lou Reed came to visit me. He was here, downstairs in the day room. Narrative. Then I saw the look of disappointment on his face when he realised he had just had a vivid dream. Terry wanted a visit so badly his need had manifested in a dream. Soon after that, Terry was given the job of storeman for the hospital shop, helping to unload and fill the storeroom. The job changed his routine. He did not go down to the town until after 2 p.m, when he closed the shutters for Pat. The difference between his life, the life he had had, and the life he would have had if there hadn't have been that stupid misunderstanding between him and his uncle, must have preyed on his mind. As a schizophrenic whose voices could not be contained by the crude medication that he was coerced into taking, he would have suffered more. There is no doubt that the incident with his Uncle Tony demoralised Terry. On hearing that his mother was reunited with David Bowie, he must have felt that he too would be in with a chance of hearing from his brother. But though Tony refused to visit Terry again, his Aunt Pat did visit, and eventually wrote many letters to David Bowie asking him to help Terry, but only received a couple of non-committal replies. I left the hospital in 1981 because I had completed the rehabilitation program. I was offered a place in a hostel in Bromley. I was lucky to be given the chance to leave the hospital, and I took it. There were other changes on the ward, more significant changes. Jack the nurse, who was content to view events on the ward with a benevolent and cynical eye, as long as he could send one of the patients down the hill to the betting shop for his daily flutter on the horses, was due to retire. Whereas Jack and Joe were happy to talk to the patients, the new nurse, Kevin, had a more distant approach, deflecting attempts at conversation by the patients, preferring to get on with the job. The atmosphere on the ward had changed on occasional shifts. He was given to familiarise himself with the ward and the patients. The equilibrium and trust built up over the years was disturbed. Terry still had Michael and Paul for company in the dormitory. Sadly, both of these patients were victims of their delusions. Michael believed the voice in his head to be that of his mother and spent half of his time screaming at her, often just to drown her voice out of his head. Paul, who believed he was a criminal and been forgiven his crimes by Dr. Jansen, was a classic paranoid schizophrenic who suspected all strangers of being plainclothes policemen. It was possible that these two, though perfectly harmless from a physical point of view, could encourage Terry to become more delusional himself. I had been discharged into hostels meant for ex-convicts. At first we were allowed to stay in during the day, but not allowed to use the kitchen or make tea in the shared rooms. Another resident punched me in the face while I was asleep, so I got a move to another hostel in Penge, where you had to be out by 9 a.m. and weren't allowed back until 4 p.m. That winter I was condemned to roam the streets, taking occasional refuge at a junkie's flat in Crystal Palace until, because of my homeless status and mental illness, I was awarded a council flat in a tower block on the Ramsden estate in Orpington. In the spring of 1982, I returned to Cane Hill to visit Terry. I did not think to phone first. Arriving late morning, I was stopped by Kevin and the nurse who had been gradually taking over Jack's shifts. As I approached the stairs to the dormitory, he asked what I was doing there. I told him I was visiting. He went back to the nurse's office. I went up to the dormitory, where I was expecting to see Terry Burns, Michael and Paul sitting on their beds smoking and talking. Only Michael was there. Guildwood Dormitory. Michael, that new nurse, Kevin, is on to me. He's trying to stop me from stealing from the other patients, but I need the money for my ephedrine. Narrator, do you know where Terry is? Michael, I don't know. Narrative. I walked off, and after visiting the hospital shop, I decided to leave the hospital by the Portnall Road side entrance. As I was walking down the path through the field that led to the road, I caught sight of Terry. He was with a patient called John, who I recognised from Browning Ward, one of the admission wards. I went back to meet him. Hello. Narrator. Hello. Terry, this is John. I'm taking him to buy his Actifed, a cough mixture that at that time still contained ephedrine. He has to have it. Narrative. I decided that I could not do anything that would help, and that Terry had company. Chris had told me that John was a good bloke, and that was good enough for me. I would be imposing if I stayed, so I left them and went home. Guildwood Dormitory. 2 months later. Terry is in the dormitory with Michael and Paul. While Michael is shouting at his mirror and Paul is complaining about plainclothes, Terry starts unscrewing the wooden blocks that prevent the window opening wide enough for someone to jump. Michael, shouting, "My boots, my 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 boots." Pause. I know my boots was. I just like saying his name. Paul, was he plainclothes? Pause. Then to Terry, what are you doing, Terry? I just want to let some air in here. It's too warm. Terry unscrews the last wood block. There are 3 screws in each wood block on each side of the window. He has used a coin to unscrew them. He pushes the window open and climbs out of the window. Terry, I've had enough. Terry falls to the ground. There's a thud, then a cry. Michael and Paul go to the window. Paul, he's still alive. Michael, I'll go and tell the nurse. Narrative. On June the 2nd, 1982, Terry jumped from a second-story window. Peter and Lenny Gilman's book, alias David Bowie, tells us that Terry was driven to jump from the dormitory window by Michael's endless ranting, and he made it clear that his apparent suicide attempt was primarily directed at Olga, his wife. Terry had told me that it was the breakup of his marriage that had triggered his suicidal thoughts. A nurse working in the hospital at the time, told me that it was because he had no one to talk to, no one to have a normal conversation with. He was upset that Dr. Jansen had advised Olga to end the marriage. All these reasons may have contributed to his suicidal act that day, some unconsciously, but there were other ongoing psychological factors at work. From the moment he was born, events conspired against Terry. Rejected by society for being illegitimate, passed to his grandmother and back again, left on his own when his family moved to Bromley. When he was accepted back into the family home, he had to endure psychological bullying from his stepfather. Rejected again when he returned from national service, Terry was then passed from pillar to post by his family. Made a hospital, a bed locker and a chair near the bed. David Bowie is sitting beside Terry, who is propped up in bed. David Bowie, picking up a carrier bag. Here, I brought you some things. David Bowie takes a cassette player, some cigarettes, some cassettes and some books out of the bag and gives them to Terry. Terry, thank you. Terry puts the cassette player on his locker and puts the books and cassettes on and in the locker. Terry, I can't stay in that hospital, David. There's one bloke who keeps shouting at his reflection in the mirror. He thinks the reflection is his mother. It's like in Psycho. And another who thinks everyone is a plainclothes policeman. David Bowie, you don't have to worry anymore. I'll help you get out of there. Terry, I've damaged my arm and my leg. David Bowie, Terry, don't worry. If you need any operations on your arm and leg, I'll pay for them. Pause. Remember those books you gave me and those records? Terry, I remember getting you that saxophone. John Jones asked me to look for one. I found it in Charing Cross Road, looking at the shop window after work. Yes, and you found Ronnie Ross for me, remember, in the phone book. Phoned him up, you said. You never got on with Dad, did you? Terry, he never had a good word for me. You were the apple of his eye. Terry, David Bowie, he was good to me. Terry, he never liked me. Remember when he used to tell us the price of every item of food on the Sunday dinner table? David Bowie laughed. He did do that. I remember that. Pause. I will get you out of that hospital. From now on, what's mine is yours. Dywall Dormitory. Terry's Aunt Pat visits. Terry, have you heard from David yet? Aunt Pat, not yet. Terry, I can't stay here. I told him that. He has promised to help me. Aunt Pat, as soon as he writes, I will let you know.